no, that's down here.
Here we go. Bong. Ba ba bong. Yeah, it had a error.
Oh.
When I quit it. When I quit it had an error. Don't, 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 don't. Yeah, I just changed the title by 1 point. There was that bit before you showed up, because I saw you came into chat just as I brought down the stream, and then the last one was 1.1. This is 1.2. Yes, should I come look and just check?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
I found another place I can climb here, so
Okay.
let's see if I can make it up with some.
Okay. Story time. Okay, here we go. I'm going to read this thing. The Hyborian Age. This is written by, what's his face? Robert E. Howard. I'll read the little pre-word, because why not? Nothing in this article is to be considered as an attempt to advance any theory in opposition to accepted history. It is simply a fictional background for a series of fiction stories. When I began writing the Conan stories a few years ago, I prepared this history of his age and the peoples of that age in order to lend them and his sagas a greater aspect of realness. And I found that by adhering to the facts and spirit of that history and writing the stories, it was easier to visualize, and therefore to present, him as a real flesh and blood character rather than a ready-made product. In writing about him and his adventures in the various kingdoms of his age, I have never violated the facts or spirit of the history here set down, but have followed the lines of that history as closely as the writer of actual historical fiction follows the lines of actual history. I have used this history as a guide in all the stories in this series that I have written. Of that epoch known by the Nemedian... hold on, let me start it again. So that's the pre-word. Of that epoch known by the Nemedian chroniclers as the pre-cataclysmic age, little is known except the latter part, and that is veiled in the mists of legendary. Known history begins with the waning of the pre-cataclysmic civilization, dominated by the kingdoms of Camelia, Valusia, Virilia, Grondar, Thule, and Comoria. These peoples spoke a similar language, arguing a common origin. There were other kingdoms, equally civilized, but inhabited by different and apparently older races. The barbarians of that age were the Picts, who lived on islands far out on the western ocean. The Atlanteans, who dwelt on a small continent between the Pictish islands and the main, or Thurian continent, and the Lemurians, who inhabited a chain of large islands in the eastern hemisphere. There were vast regions of unexplored land. The civilized kingdoms, though enormous in extent, occupied a comparatively small portion of the whole planet. Valusia was the westernmost kingdom of the Thurian continent, Grondar the easternmost. East of Grondar, whose people were less highly cultured than those of their kindred kingdoms, stretched a wild and barren expanse of deserts. Among the less arid stretches of desert, in the jungles, and among the mountains, lived scattered clans and tribes of primitive savages. Far to the south there was a mysterious civilization, unconnected with Arthurian culture, and apparently pre-human in its nature. On the far eastern shores of the continent there lived another race, human, but mysterious and non-Thurian, with which the Lemurians from time to time came in contact. They apparently came from a shadowy and nameless continent lying somewhere east of the Lemurian islands. The Thurian civilization was crumbling. Their armies were composed largely of barbarian mercenaries. Picts, Atlanteans, and Lemurians were their generals, their statesmen, often their kings. Of the bickerings of the kingdoms and the wars between Velusia and Comoria, as well as the conquests by which the Atlanteans founded a kingdom on the mainland, there were more legends than accurate history. Then the cataclysm rocked the world. Atlantis and Lemuria sank, and the Pictish islands were heaved up to form the mountain peaks of the new continent. Sections of the Thurian continent vanished under the waves, or sinking, formed great inland lakes and seas. Volcanoes broke forth, and terrific earthquakes shook down the shining cities of the empires. Whole nations were blotted out. The barbarians fared a little better than the civilized races. The inhabitants of the Pictish islands were destroyed, but a great colony of them settled among the mountains of the Velusian southern frontier to serve as a buffer against foreign invasion. Was untouched. The continental kingdom of the Atlanteans likewise escaped the common ruin, and to it came thousands of their tribesmen in ships from the sinking land. Many Lemurians escaped to the eastern coast of the Thurian continent, which was comparatively untouched. There they were enslaved by the ancient race which already dwelt there, and their history for thousands of years is a history of brutal servitude. In the western part of the continent, changing conditions created strange forms of plant and animal life. Thick jungles covered the plains. Great rivers cut their roads to the sea. Wild mountains were heaved up, and lakes covered the ruins of old cities and fertile valleys. To the continental kingdom of the Atlanteans, from sunken areas, swarmed myriads of beasts and savages, ape-men and apes. Forced to battle continually for their lives, they yet managed to retain vestiges of their former state of highly advanced barbarism. Robbed of metals and ores, they became workers in stone like their distant ancestors, and had attained a real artistic level when their struggling culture came into contact with the powerful Pictish nation. The Picts had also reverted to flint, but had advanced more rapidly in the matter of population and war science. They had none of the Atlanteans' artistic nature. They were a ruder, more practical, more prolific race. They left no pictures painted or carved on ivory, as did their enemies, but they left remarkably efficient flint weapons in plenty. These Stone Age kingdoms clashed, and in a series of bloody wars, the outnumbered Atlanteans were hurled back into a state of savagery, and the evolution of the Picts was halted. 500 years after the cataclysm, the barbaric kingdoms have vanished. It is now a nation of savages, the Picts, carrying on continual warfare with tribes of savages. The Atlanteans. The Picts had the advantage of numbers and unity, whereas the Atlanteans had fallen into loosely knit clans. That was the West of that day. In the distant East, cut off from the rest of the world by the heaving up of gigantic mountains and the forming of a chain of vast lakes, the Lemurians are toiling as slaves in their ancient master... Oh, sorry, hold on 1 second, I've got to eat. The Lemurians are toiling as slaves of their ancient masters. The far south is still veiled in mystery. Untouched by the cataclysm, its destiny is still pre-human. Of the civilized races of the Thurian continent, a remnant of one of the non-Velusian nations dwells among the low mountains of the southeast, the Zemri. Here and there about the world are scattered clans of apish savages, entirely ignorant of the rise and fall of the great civilizations, but in the far north another people are slowly coming into existence. At the time of the cataclysm, a band of savages, whose development was not much above that of Neanderthal, fled to the north to escape destruction. They found the snow countries inhabited only by a species of ferocious snow apes, huge shaggy white animals, apparently native to that climate. These they fought and drove beyond the Arctic Circle, to perish, as the savages thought. The latter, then, adapted themselves to their hardy new environment and throve. After the Pictish-Atlantean Wars had destroyed the beginnings of what might have been a new culture, another, lesser cataclysm further altered the appearance of the original continent, left a great inland sea where the chain of lakes had been, to further separate west from east, and the attendant earthquakes, floods, and volcanoes completed the ruin of the barbarians which their tribal wars had begun. 1,000 years after the lesser cataclysm, the western world is seen to be a wild country of jungles and lakes and torrential rivers. Among the forest-covered hills of the northwest exist wandering bands of ape men, without human speech, or the knowledge of fire or the use of implements. They are the descendants of the Atlanteans, sunk back into the squalling chaos of jungle bestiality, from which ages ago their ancestors so laboriously crawled. To the southwest dwell scattered clans of degraded, cave-dwelling savages, whose speech is of the most primitive form, yet who still retain the name of Picts, which has come to mean merely a term designating men themselves, to distinguish them from the true beasts with which they contend for life and food. It is the only link with their former stage. Neither the squalid Picts nor the apish Atlanteans have any contact with other tribes or peoples. Far to the east, the Lemurians, levelled almost to a bestial plane themselves by the brutishness of their slavery, have risen and destroyed their masters. They are savages stalking among the ruins of a strange civilization. The survivors of that civilization, who have escaped the fury of their slaves, have come westward. They fall upon that mysterious pre-human kingdom of the south and overthrow it, substituting their own culture, modified by contact with the older one. The newer kingdom is called Stygia, and remnants of the older nation seem to have survived, and even been worshipped, after the race as a whole had been destroyed. Here and there in the world, small groups of savages are showing signs of an upward trend. These are scattered and unclassified, but in the north the tribes are growing. These people are called Hyborians, or Hybori. Their god was Borai, some great chief, whom legend made even more ancient as the king who led them into the north, in the days of the great cataclysm, which the tribes remember only in distorted folklore. They have spread over the north, and are pushing southward in leisurely treks. So far they have not come in contact with any other races. Their wars have been with one another. 1,500 years in the north country have made them a tall, tawny-haired, grey-eyed race, vigorous and warlike, and already exhibiting a well-defined artistry and poeticism of nature. They still live mostly by the hunt, but the southern tribes have been raising cattle for some centuries. There is one exception in their so far complete isolation from other races. A wanderer into the far north returned with the news that the supposedly deserted ice wastes were inhabited by an extensive tribe of ape-like men, descended, he swore, from the beasts driven out of the more habitable land by the ancestors of the Hyborians. He urged that a large war party be sent beyond the Arctic Circle to exterminate these beasts, whom he swore were evolving into true men. He was jeered at. A small band of adventurous young warriors followed him into the north, but none returned. But tribes of the Hyborians were drifting south, and as the population increased, this movement became extensive. The following age was an epoch of wandering and conquest. Across the history of the world, tribes and drifts of tribes moved and shifted in an ever-changing panorama. Look at the world 500 years later. Tribes of tawny-haired Hyborians have moved southward and westward, conquering and destroying many of the small unclassified clans, absorbing the blood of conquered races. Already the descendants of the older drifts have begun to show modified racial traits, and these mixed races are attacked fiercely by new, purer-blooded drifts, and swept before them, as a broom sweeps debris impartially, to become even more mixed and mingled in the tangled debris of races and tag ends of races. As yet the conquerors have not come in contact with the older races. To the southeast, the descendants of the Zemrai, given impetus by new blood resulting from admixture with some unclassified tribe, are beginning to seek to revive some faint shadow of their ancient culture. To the west, the apish Atlanteans are beginning the long climb upward. They have completed the cycle of existence. They have long forgotten their former existence as men, unaware of any other former state. They are starting to climb up unhelped and unhindered by human memories. To the south of them, the Picts remain savages, apparently defying the laws of nature by neither progressing nor retrogressing. Far to the south dreams the ancient and mysterious kingdom of Stygia. On its eastern borders wander clans of nomadic savages, already known as the sons of Shem. Next to the Picts, in the broad valley of Zing, protected by great mountains, a nameless band of primitives, tentatively classified as akin to the Shemites, has evolved an advanced agricultural system and existence. Another factor has added to the impetus of Hyborian drift. A tribe of that race has discovered the use of stone in building, and the first Hyborian kingdom has come into being, the rude and barbaric kingdom of Hyperborea, which had its beginnings in a crude fortress of boulders heaped to repel tribal attacks. The people of this tribe soon abandoned their horse-hide tents for stone houses, crudely but mightily built, and thus protected. They grew strong. There are few more dramatic events in history than the rise of the rude, fierce kingdom of Hyperborea, whose people turned abruptly from their nomadic life to rear dwellings of naked stone, surrounded by cyclopean walls. A race scarcely emerged from the polished Stone Age, who had, by a freak of chance, learned the first rude principles of architecture. The rise of this kingdom drove forth many other tribes, for, defeated in the war, or refusing to become tributary to their castle-dwelling kinsmen, many clans set forth on long treks that took them halfway around the world, and already the more northern tribes are beginning to be harried by gigantic blonde savages, not much more advanced than ape-men. The tale of the next 1,000 years is the tale of the rise of the Hyborians, whose warlike tribes dominate the western world. Rude kingdoms are taking shape. The tawny-haired invaders have encountered the Picts, driving them into the barren lands of the west. To the northwest, the descendants of the Atlanteans, climbing unaided from apedom into primitive savagery, have not yet met the conquerors. Far to the east, the Lemurians are evolving a strange semi-civilization of their own. To the south, the Hyborians have founded the kingdoms of Koth, on the borders of those pastoral countries known as the lands of Shem, and the savages of those lands, partly through contact with the Hyborians, partly through contact with the Stygians, who have ravaged them for centuries, are emerging from barbarism. The blonde savages of the far north have grown in power and numbers, so that the northern Hyborian tribes move southward, driving their kindred clans before them. The ancient kingdom of Hyperborea is overthrown by one of these northern tribes, which, however, retains the old name. Southeast of Hyperborea, a kingdom of the Zemri has come into being, under the name of Zamora. To the southwest, a tribe of Picts have invaded the fertile valley of Zing, conquered the agricultural people there, and settled among them. This mixed race was in turn conquered later by a roving tribe of Hyborai, and from these mingled elements came the kingdom of Zingaria. "500 years later, the kingdom of the world was clearly defined. The kingdoms of the Hyborians, Aquilonia, Nemedia, Brythunia, Hyperborea, Koth, Ophir, Argos, Corinthia, and one known as the Border Kingdom, dominate the western world. Zamora lies to the east, and Zingara to the southwest of these kingdoms. People alike in darkness of complexion and exotic habits, but otherwise unrelated. Far to the south sleeps Stygia, untouched by foreign invasion, but the peoples of Shem have exchanged the Stygian yoke for the less galling one of Koth. The dusky masters have been driven south of the great river Styx, Nilus or Nile, which, flowing north from the shadowy hinterlands, turns almost at right angles and flows almost due west through the pastoral meadowlands of Shem, to empty into the Great Sea. North of Aquilonia, the westernmost Hyborian kingdom, and the Cimmerians, ferocious savages untamed by the invaders, but advancing rapidly because of contact with them. They are the descendants of the Atlanteans, now progressing more steadily than their old enemies, the Picts, who dwell in the wilderness west of Aquilonia. Another 5 centuries and the Hyborai peoples are the possessors of a civilization so virile that contact with it virtually snatched out of the wallow of savagery such tribes as it touched. The most powerful kingdom is Aquilonia, but others vie with it in strength and mixed race. The nearest to the ancient root stock are the Gundurmen of Gunderland, a northern province of Aquilonia. but this mixing has not weakened the race. They are supreme in the Western world, though the barbarians of the wastelands are growing in strength. In the north, golden-haired, blue-eyed barbarians, descendants of the blonde Arctic savages, have driven the remaining Hyborian tribes out of the snow countries, except the ancient kingdom of Hyperborea, which resists their onslaught. Their country is called Nordheim, and they are divided into the red-haired Vanir of Vanaheim and the yellow-haired Aesir of Asgard. Now the Lumerians enter history again as Hyrcanians. Through the centuries they have pushed steadily westward, and now a tribe skirts the southern end of the great inland sea, Viliet, and establishes the kingdom of Turan on the southwestern shore. Between the inland sea and the eastern borders of the native kingdoms lie vast expanses of steppes, and in the extreme north and extreme south, deserts. The non-Hyrcanian dwellers of these territories are scattered and pastoral, unclassified in the north, Shemitish in the south, aboriginal, with a thin strain of Hyborian blood from wandering conquerors. Toward the latter part of the period, other Hyrcanian clans push westward around the northern extremity of the inland sea and clash with the eastern outposts of the Hyperboreans. Glance briefly at the peoples of that age. The dominant of Hyborians are no longer uniformly tawny-haired and grey-eyed. They have mixed up with other races. There is a strong Shemitish, even a Stygian strain among the peoples of Koth, and to a lesser extent of Argos, while in the case of the latter, admixture with the Zingarans has been more extensive than with the Shemites. The eastern Brythunians have intermarried with the dark-skinned Zamorians, and the people of southern Aquilonia have mixed with the brown Zingarans until black hair and brown eyes are the dominant types in Poitain, the southernmost province. The ancient kingdom of Hyperborea is more aloof than the others, yet there is alien blood in plenty in its veins, from the capture of foreign women, Hyrcanians, Aesir, and Zamorians. Only in the province of Gunderland, where the people keep no slaves, is the pure Hyborian stock found unblemished. But the barbarians have kept their bloodstream pure. The Cimmerians are tall and powerful, with dark hair and blue or grey eyes. The people of Nordheim are of similar build, but with white skins, blue eyes, and golden or red hair. The Picts are of the same type as they always were, short, very dark, with black eyes and hair. The Hyrcanians are dark and generally tall and slender, though a squat, slant-eyed type is more and more common among them, resulting from mixture with a curious race of intelligent, though stunted, aborigines, conquered by them among the mountains east of Viliet on their westward drift. Give me 1 second. Okay. Starving, I had to get some food. The Shemites are generally of medium height, though sometimes, when mixed with Stygian blood, gigantic, broadly and strongly built, with hooked noses, dark eyes, and blue-black hair. The Stygians are tall and well-made, dusky, straight-featured. At least the ruling classes are of that type. The lower classes are a downtrodden, mongrel horde, a mixture of Negroid, Stygian, Shemitish, even Hyborian bloods. South of Stygia are the vast black kingdoms of the Amazons, the Cushites, the Atlaeans, and the hybrid empires of Zimbabwe. Between Aquilonia and the Pictish wilderness lie the Bosonian marches, peopled by descendants of an aboriginal race, conquered by a tribe of Hyborians early in the first ages of the Hyborian drift. This mixed people never attained the civilization of the purer Hyborians, and was pushed by them to the very fringe of the civilized world. The Bosonians are of medium height and complexion, their eyes brown or grey, and they are mesiophilic. They live mainly by agriculture in large walled villages, and are part of the Aquilonian kingdom. Their marches extend from the border kingdom in the north of Zingara in the southwest, forming a bulwark for Aquilonia against both the Cimmerians and the Picts. They are stubborn defensive fighters, and centuries of warfare against northern and western barbarians have caused them to evolve a type of defense almost impregnable against direct attack. 500 years later, the Hyborian civilization was swept away. Its fall was unique in that it was not brought about by internal decay, but by the growing power of the barbarian nations and the Hyrcanians. The Hyborian people were overthrown while their vigorous culture was in its prime. Yet it was Aquilonians' greed which brought about that overthrow, though indirectly. Wishing to extend their empire, her kings made war on their neighbours. Zingara, Argos, and Uffa were annexed outright, with the western cities of Shem, which had, in their more eastern kindred, recently thrown off the yoke of Koth. Koth itself, with Corinthia and the eastern Shemitist tribes, was forced to pay Aquilonia tribute and lend aid in wars. An ancient feud had existed between Aquilonia and Hyperborea, and the latter now marched to meet the armies of her western rival. The plains of the border kingdom were the scene of a great and savage battle, in which the northern hosts were utterly defeated and retreated into their snowy fastnesses, whither the victorious Aquilonians did not pursue them. Numidia, which had successfully resisted the western kingdom for centuries, now drew Brythunia and Zamora, and secretly Koth, into an alliance which bade fair to crush the rising empire. But before their armies could join battle, a new enemy appeared in the east, as the Hyrcanians made their first real thrust at the western world. Reinforced by adventurers from east of Viliat, the riders of Turan swept over Zamora, devastated eastern Corinthia, and were met on the plains of Brythunia by the Aquilonians, who defeated them and hurled them flying eastward. But the back of the alliance was broken, and Numidia took the defensive in future wars, aided occasionally by Brythunia and Hyperborea, and secretly, as usual, by Koth. This defeat of the Hyrcanians showed the nations the real power of the Western Kingdom, whose splendid armies were augmented by mercenaries, many of them recruited among the alien Zingarans and the barbaric Picts and Shemites. Zamora was conquered from the Hyrcanians, but the people discovered that they had merely exchanged an eastern master for a western master. Aquilonian soldiers were quartered there, not only to protect the ravaged country, but also to keep the people in subjection. The Hyrcanians were not convinced. 3 more invasions burst upon the Zamoran borders and the lands of Shem, and were hurled back by the Aquilonians, though the Turanian armies grew larger, as hordes of steel-clad raiders rode out of the east, skirting the southern extremity of the inland sea. But it was the west that a power was growing, destined to throw down the kings of Aquilonia from their high places. In the north there was the insistent bickering along the Cimmerian borders between the black-haired warriors and the Nordheimer and the Acer. Between wars with the Vanir, assailed Hyperborea and pushed back the frontier, destroying city after city. The Cimmerians also fought the Picts and Bossonians impartially, and several times raided into Aquilonia itself, but their wars were less invasions than mere plundering forays. But the Picts were growing amazingly in population and power. By a strange twist of fate, it was largely due to the efforts of one man, and he an alien, that they set their feet upon the ways that led to eventual empire. This man was Eros, a Numidian priest, a natural-born reformer. What turned his mind toward the Picts is not certain, but this much is history. He determined to go into the western wilderness and modify the rude ways of the heathen by the introduction of the gentle worship of Mitra. He was not daunted by the grisly tales of what had happened to traders and explorers before him, and by some whim of fate he came among the people he sought, alone and unarmed, and was not instantly spared. The Picts had benefited by contact with the Hyborian civilization, but they had always fiercely resisted that contact. That is to say, they had learned to work crudely in copper and tin, which were found scantily in their country, and of which latter metal they raided into the mountains of Zingara, or traded hides, whale's teeth, walrus tusks, and such few things as savages had to trade. They no longer lived in caves and tree shelters, but built tents of hides and crude huts, Copied from those of the Bosonians, they still lived mainly by the chase, since their wilds swarmed with game of all sorts, and the rivers and sea with fish, but they had learned how to plant grain, which they did sketchily, preferring to steal it from their neighbours, the Bosonians and Zingarans. They dealt in clans which were generally at feud with each other, and their simple customs were bloodthirsty and utterly inexplicable to the civilized man, such as Aris of Numidia. They had no direct contact with the Hyborians, since the Bosonians acted as a buffer between them, but Aris maintained that they were capable of progress, and events proved the truth of his assertion, though scarcely in the way he meant. Aris was fortunate in being thrown in with a chief of more than usual intelligence, Gorm by name. Gorm cannot be explained, any more than Genghis Khan, Othman, Attila, or any of those individuals who, born in naked lands among untutored barbarians, yet possess the instinct for conquest and empire-building. In a sort of bastard Bosonian, the priest made the chief understand his purpose, and though extremely puzzled, Gorm gave him permission to remain among his tribe unbutchered. A case unique in the history of the race. Having learned the language, Aris set himself to work to eliminate the more unpleasant phases of Pictish life, such as human sacrifice, blood feud, and the burning alive of captives. He harangued Gorm at length, whom he found to be an interested, if unresponsive, listener. Imagination reconstructs the scene. The black-haired chief, in his tiger skins and necklace of human teeth, squatting in the dirt floor of the wattle hut, listening intently to the eloquence of the priest, who probably sat on a carven, skin-covered block of mahogany provided in his honour, clad in the silken robes of a Numidian priest, gesturing with his slender white hands as he expounded the eternal rights and justices which were the truths of Mitra. Doubtless he pointed with repugnance at the rows of skulls which adorned the walls of the hut, and urged Gorm to forgive his enemies instead of putting their bleached remnants to such use. Aris was the highest product of an innately artistic race, refined by centuries of civilization. Gorm had behind him a heritage of 100,000 years of screaming savagery. The pad of the tiger was in his stealthy step, the grip of the gorilla in his black-nailed hands. The fire that burns in a leopard's eye burned in his. Aris was a practical man. He appealed to the savage's sense of material gain. He pointed out the power and splendor of the Hyborian kingdoms as an example of the power of Mitra, whose teachings and works had lifted them up to their high places, and he spoke of cities and fertile plains, marble walls and iron chariots, jewelled towers, and horsemen in their glittering armour riding to battle. And Gorm, with the unerring instinct of the barbarian, passed over his words regarding gods and their teachings, and fixed on the material powers thus vividly described. There in that mud-floored wattle hut, with the silk-robed priest on the mahogany block, and the dark-skinned chief crouching in his tiger hides, was laid the foundations of empire. As has been said, Aris was a practical man. He dwelt among the Picts and found much that an intelligent man could do to aid humanity, even when that humanity was cloaked in tiger skins and wore necklaces of human teeth. Like all priests of Mitra, he was instructed in many things. He found that there were vast deposits of iron ore in the Pictish hills, and he taught the natives to mine, smelt, and work it into implements, agricultural implements, as he fondly believed. He instituted other reforms, but these were the most important things he did. He instilled in Gorm a desire to see the civilized lands of the world. He taught the Picts how to work in iron, and he established contact between them and the civilized world. At the chief's request, he conducted him and some of his warriors through the Bosonian marches, where the honest villagers stared in amazement into the glittering outer world. Aris, no doubt, thought that he was making converts right and left, because the Picts listened to him and refrained from smiting him with their copper axes. But the Pict was little calculated to seriously regard teachings which bade him forgive his enemy and abandon the warpath for the ways of honest drudgery. It had been said that he lacked artistic sense. His whole nature led to war and slaughter. When the priest talked of the glories of the civilized nations, his dark-skinned listeners were intent, not on the ideals of his religion, but on the loot which he unconsciously described in the narration of rich cities and shining lands. When he told how Mitra aided certain kings to overcome their enemies, they paid scant heed to the miracles of Mitra, but they hung on the description of battle lines, mounted knights, and maneuvers of archers and spearmen. They hearkened with keen dark eyes and inscrutable countenances, and they went their ways without comment, and heeded with flattering intentness, with instructions as to the working of iron and kindred arts. Before his coming they had filched steel weapons and armour from the Bosonians and Zingarans, or had hammered out their own crude arms from copper and bronze. Now a new world opened to them, and the clang of sledges re-echoed throughout the land, and Gorm, by virtue of his new craft, began to assert his dominance over other clans, partly by war, partly by craft and diplomacy, in which latter art he excelled at all other barbarians. Picts now came and went freely into Aquilonia, under safe conduct, and they returned with more information as to armour forging and sword-making. More they entered Aquilonians' mercenary armies, to the unspeakable disgust of the sturdy Bosonians. Aquilonians' kings toyed with the idea of playing the Picts against the Cimmerians, and possibly thus destroying both menaces, but they were too busy with their policies of aggression in the south and east to pay much heed to the vaguely known lands of the west, from which more and more stocky warriors swarmed to take service among the mercenaries. These warriors, their service completed, went back to their wilderness with good ideas of civilized warfare, and that contempt for civilization which arises from familiarity with it. Drums began to beat in the hills, gathering fires smoked on the heights, and savage sword-makers hammered their steel on 1,000 anvils. By intrigues and forays too numerous and devious to enumerate, Gorm became chief of chiefs, the nearest approach to a king the Picts had had in thousands of years. He had waited long, he was past middle age, but now he moved against the frontiers, not in trade, but in war. Whew, all right. Aris saw his mistake too late. He had not touched the soul of the pagan, in which lurked the hard fierceness of all the ages. His persuasive eloquence had not caused a ripple in the Pictish conscience. Gorm wore a corselet of silvered mail now, instead of the tiger skin, but underneath it he was unchanged. The everlasting barbarian, unmoved by theology or philosophy, his instincts were unerring on rapine and plunder. The Picts burst on the Bosonian frontiers with fire and sword, not clad in tiger skins and brandishing copper axes as of yore, but in scale mail, wielding weapons of keen steel. As for Aris, he was brained by a drunken Pict while making a last effort to undo the work he had unwittingly done. Gorm was not without gratitude. He caused the skull of the slayer to be set on the top of the priest's cairn, and it is one of the grim ironies of the universe that the stones which covered Aris's body should have been adorned with that vast touch of barbarity above a man to whom violence and blood vengeance were revolting. Where am I up to? But the newer weapon and mail were not enough to break the lines. For years the superior armaments and sturdy courage of the Bosonians held the invaders at bay, aided, when necessary, by imperial Aquilonian troops. During this time the Hyrcanians came and went, and Zamora was added to the empire. Then treachery from an unexpected source broke the Bosonian lines. Before chronicling this treachery, it might be well to glance briefly at the Aquilonian Empire. Always a rich kingdom, untold wealth had been rolled in by conquest, and sumptuous splendour had taken the place of simple and hardy living. But degeneracy had not yet sapped the kings and the people. Though clad in silks and cloth of gold, they were still a vital, virile race, but arrogance was supplanting their former simplicity. They treated less powerful people with growing contempt, levying more and more tributes on the conquered. Argos, Zingaran, Offa, Zamora, and the Shemite countries were treated as subjugated provinces, which was especially galling to the proud Zingarans, who often revolted despite savage retaliations. Koth was practically tributary, being under Aquilonians' protection against the Herconians, but Numidia the Western Empire had never been able to subdue, although the latter's triumphs were of the defensive sort, and were generally attained with the aid of Hyperborean armies. During this period, Aquilonians' only defeats were her failure to annex Numidia, the rout of an army sent into Samaria, and the almost complete destruction of an army by the Aesir, just as the Herconians found themselves unable to withstand the heavy cavalry charges of the Aquilonians, so the latter, invading the snow countries, were overwhelmed by the ferocious hand-to-hand fighting of the Nordics. But Aquilonians' conquests were pushed to the Nilus, where a Stygian army was defeated with great slaughter, and the kings of Stygia sent tribute, once at least, to divert invasion of his kingdom. Brythunia was reduced in a series of whirlwind wars, and preparations were made to subjugate the ancient rival at last, Numidia. With their glittering hosts greatly increased by mercenaries, the Aquilonians moved against their old-time foe, and it seemed as if the thrust were destined to crush the last shadow of Numidian independence. But contentions arose between the Aquilonians and the Bosonian auxiliaries. As the inevitable result of imperial expansion, the Aquilonians had become haughty and intolerant. They derided the ruder, unsophisticated Bosonians, and hard feelings grew between them. The Aquilonians, despising the Bosonians, and the latter resenting the attitude of their masters, who now boldly called themselves such, and treated the Bosonians like conquered subjects, taxing them exorbitantly, and conscripting them for their wars of territorial expansion, wars the profits of which the Bosonians shared little. Scarcely enough men were left in the marches to guard the frontier, and hearing of Pictish outrages in their homelands, whole Bosonian regiments quit the Numidian campaign and marched to the western frontier, where they defeated the dark-skinned invaders in a great battle. This desertion, however, was the direct cause of Aquilonians' defeat by the desperate Numidians, and brought down the Bosonians. The cruel wrath of the imperialists, intolerant and short-sighted as imperialists invariably are. Aquilonian regiments were secretly brought to the borders of the marches. The Bosonian chiefs were invited to attend a great conclave, and in the guise of an expedition against the Picts, bands of savage Shemite soldiers were quartered among the unsuspecting villages. The unarmed chiefs were massacred, the Shemites turned on their stunned hosts with torch and sword, and the armoured imperial hosts were hurled ruthlessly on the unsuspecting people. From north to south the marches were ravaged, and the Aquilonian armies marched back from the borders, leaving a ruined and devastated land behind them. And then the Pictish invasion burst in full power along those borders. It was no mere raid, but the concerted rush of a whole nation, led by chiefs who had served in Aquilonian armies, and planned and directed by Gorm, an old man now, but with the fire of his fierce ambition undimmed. This time there was no strong walled villages in their path, manned by sturdy archers, to hold back the rush until the imperial troops could be brought up. The remnants of the Bosonians were swept out of existence, and the blood-mad barbarians swarmed into Aquilonia, looting and burning, before the legions, warring again with the Numidians, could be marched into the west. Zingara seized this opportunity to throw off the yoke, which example was followed by Corinthia and the Shemites. Whole regiments of mercenaries and vassals mutinied and marched back to their own countries, looting and burning as they went. The Picts surged irresistibly eastward, and host after host was trampled beneath their feet. Without their Bosonian archers, the Aquilonians found themselves unable to cope with the terrible arrow fire of the barbarians. From all parts of the empire, legions were recalled to resist the onrush, while from the wilderness, horde after horde swarmed forth, an apparently inexhaustible supply. And in the midst of this chaos, the Cimmerians swept down from their hills, completing the ruin. They looted cities, devastated the country, and retired into the hills with their plunder. But the Picts occupied the land they had overrun, and the Aquilonian empire went down in fire and blood. Then again the Hercunians rode from the blue east. The withdrawal of the imperial legions from Zamora was their incitement. Zamora fell easy prey to their thrusts, and the Hercunian king established his capital in the largest city of the country. This invasion was from the ancient Hercunian kingdom of Turan, on the shores of the inland sea. But another, more savage Hercunian thrust came from the north. Hosts of steel-clad riders galloped around the northern extremity of the inland sea, traversed the icy deserts, entered the steppes, driving the aborigines before them, and launched themselves against the western kingdoms. These newcomers were not at first allies with the Turanians, but skirmished with them as with the Hyborians. New drifts of eastern warriors bickered and fought, until all were united under a great chief, who came riding from the very shores of the eastern ocean. With no Aquilonian armies to oppose them, they were invincible. They swept over and subjugated Brythonia, and devastated southern Hyperborea and Corinthia. They swept into the Cimmerian hills, driving the black-haired barbarians before them. But among the hills where cavalry was less ineffectual, the Cimmerians turned on them, and only a disorderly retreat at the end of a whole day of bloody fighting saved the Herconian host from complete annihilation. While these events had been transpiring, the kingdom of Shem had conquered their ancient masters, Koth, and had been defeated in an attempted invasion of Stygia. But scarcely had they completed their degradation of Koth when they were overrun by the Herconians, and found themselves subjugated by sterner masters than the Hyborians had ever been. Meanwhile, the Picts had made themselves complete masters of Aquilonia, practically blotting out the inhabitants. They had broken over the borders of Zingara, and thousands of Zingarans, fleeing the slaughter into Argos, threw themselves on the mercy of the westward sweeping Herconians, who settled them in Zamora as subjects. Behind them as they fled, Argos was enveloped in the flame and slaughter of Pictish conquest, and the slayers swept into Ophir and clashed with the western riding Herconians. The latter, after their conquest of Shem, had overthrown a Stygian army at the Nilus and overrun the country as far south as the Black Kingdom of Amazon, of whose people they brought back thousands as captives, settling them among the Shemites. Possibly they would have completed their conquests in Stygia, adding it to their widening empire, but for the fierce thrusts of the Picts against their western conquests. Nemedia, unconquerable by Hyborians, reeled between the riders of the east and the swordsmen of the west, when a tribe of Aesir, wandering down from their snowy lands, came into the kingdom and were engaged as mercenaries. They proved such able warriors that they not only beat off the Herconians, but halted the eastward advance of the Picts. The world at that time presents some such picture. A vast Pictish empire, wild, rude, and barbaric, stretches from the coasts of Vanaheim in the north to the southernmost shores of Zingara. It stretches east to include all Aquilonia except Gunderland, the northernmost province, which, as a separate kingdom in the hills, survived the fall of the empire, and still maintains its independence. The Pictish Empire also includes Argos, Ophir, and western part of Koth, and the westernmost lands of Shem. Opposed to this barbaric empire is the empire of the Hercanians, of which the northern boundaries are the ravaged lines of Hyperborea, and the deserts south of the lands of Shem. Zamora, Brythonia, the border kingdom, Corinthia, most of Koth, and all the eastern lands of Shem are included in this empire. The borders of Samaria are intact. Neither Pict nor Hercanian has been able to subdue these warlike barbarians. Nemedia, dominated by the Aesir mercenaries, resists all invasions. In the north, Nordheim, Samaria, and Nemedia separate the conquering races. But in the south, Koth has become a battleground where Picts and Hercanians war incessantly. Sometimes the eastern warriors expel the barbarians from the kingdom entirely. Again, the plains and cities are in the hands of the western invaders. In the far south, Stygia, shaken by the Hercanian invasion, is being encroached upon by the great black kingdoms. And in the far north, the Nordic tribes are restless, warring continually with the Cimmerians and sweeping the Hyperborean frontiers. Gorm was slain by Helma, a chief of the Nemedian Aesima. He was a very old man, nearly 100 years old. In the 75 years which had elapsed since he first heard the tale of empires from the lips of Aris, a long time in the life of a man, but a brief space in the tale of nations, he had welded an empire from straying savage clans. He had overthrown a civilization. He who had been born in a mud-walled, wattle-roofed hut, in the old age sat on golden thrones, and gnawed joints of beef presented to him on golden dishes by naked slave girls who were the daughters of kings. Conquest and the acquiring of wealth altered not the Pict. Out of the ruins of the crushed civilization, no new culture arose, phoenix-like. The dark hands which shattered the artistic glories of the conquered never tried to copy them, though he sat among the glittering ruins of shattered palaces and clad his hard body in the silks of vanquished kings. The Pict remained the eternal barbarian, ferocious, elemental, interested only in the naked primal principles of life, unchanging, unerring in his instincts, which were all for war and plunder, and in which arts and the cultured progress of humanity had no place. Not so with the Aesir, who settled in Nemedia. They soon adopted many of the ways of their civilized allies, modified powerfully, however, by their own intensely virile and alien culture. For a short age, Pict and Hyrcanians snarled at each other over the ruins of the world they had conquered. Then began the glacier ages and the great Nordic drift. Before the southward moving ice fields, the Nordic tribes drifted, driving kindred clans before them. The Aesir blotted out the ancient kingdom of Hyperborea, and across its ruins came to grips with the Hyrcanians. Nemedia had already become a Nordic kingdom, ruled by the descendants of the Aesir mercenaries, driven before the onrushing tides of Nordic invasion. The Cimmerians were on the march, and neither army nor city stood before them. They surged across the completely destroyed the kingdoms of Gunderland, and marched across the ancient Aquilonia, hewing their irresistible way through the Pictish hosts. They defeated the Nordic Nemedians and sacked some of their cities, but did not halt. They continued eastward, overthrowing a Hyrcanian army and on the borders of Brythunia. Behind them, hordes of Aesir and Vanir swarmed into the lands, and the Pictish Empire reeled beneath their strokes. Nemedia was overthrown, and the half-civilized Nordics fled before their wilder kinsmen, leaving the cities of Nemedia ruined and deserted. These fleeing Nordics, who had adopted the name of the older kingdom, and to whom the term Nemedia these fleeing Nordics who had adopted the name of the older kingdom, and to whom the term Nemedia henceforth refers, came into the ancient land of Koth, expelled both Picts and Hyrcanians, and aided the people of Shem to throw off the Hyrcanian yoke. All over the western world, the Picts and Hyrcanians were staggering before this younger, fiercer people. A band of Aesir drove the eastern riders from Brythunia and settled there themselves, adopting the name for themselves. The Nordics, who had conquered Hyperborea, assailed their eastern enemies so savagely that the dark-skinned descendants of the Lumerians retreated into the steppes, pushed irresistibly back toward Valiat. Meanwhile, the Cimmerians, wandering southeastward, destroyed the ancient Hyrcanian kingdom of Turan and settled on the southwestern shores of the inland sea. The power of the eastern conquerors was broken. Before the attacks on the Nordheimer and the Cimmerians, they destroyed all their cities, butchered such captives as were not fit to make the long march, and then, herding themselves with slaves before them, rode back into the mysterious east, skirting the northern edge of the sea and vanishing from western history, until they rode out of the east again thousands of years later, as Huns, Mongols, Tatars, and Turks. With them, in their retreat, went thousands of Zamorians and Zingarans, who were settled together far to the east, formed a mixed race, and emerged ages afterwards as gypsies. Meanwhile, also a tribe of Vanir adventurers had passed Okay. One sec. I'll be back in just a second. It's almost over. But I might have to run off and save, Need some water. Okay. Alright, where are we? Just go find the place. And then Mongo's here. Okay. Merges. Okay. Meanwhile, also a tribe of Vanir adventurers had passed along the Pictus coast southward, ravaged ancient Zingara, and come into Stygia, which, oppressed by a cruel aristocratic ruling class, was staggering under the thrust of the Black Kingdoms to the south. The red-haired Vanir led the slaves in a general revolt, overthrew the reigning class, and set themselves up as a caste of conquerors. They subjugated the northernmost Black Kingdoms and built a vast southern empire, which they called Egypt. From these red-haired conquerors the earlier pharaohs boasted descent. The western world was now dominated by Nordic barbarians. The Picts still held Aquilonia and part of Zingara, and the western coast of the continent. But east of Valiat, and from the Arctic Circle to the lands of Shem, the only inhabitants were roving tribes of Nordheimer, excepting the Cimmerians, settled in the old Tyrian kingdom. There were no cities. Oh, my power might go out. We've had bad weather today. There were no cities anywhere, except in Stygia and the lands of Shem. The invading tides of Picts, Hyrcanians, Cimmerians, and Nordics had levelled them in ruins, and the once dominant Hyborians had vanished from the earth, leaving scarcely a trace of their blood in the veins of the conquerors. Only a few names of lands, tribes, and cities remained in the languages of the barbarians, to come down through the centuries connected with distorted legend and fable, until the whole country of the Hyborian age was lost sight of in a cloud of myths and fantasies. Thus in the speech of the gypsies lingered the terms Zingara and Zamora. The Aesir, who dominated Nemedia, were called Nemedians, and later figured in Irish history, and the Nordics, who settled in Brythunia, were known as Brythunians, Brythons, or Britons. There was no such thing at the time as a consolidated Nordic empire. As always, the tribes had each its own chief or king, and they fought savagely among themselves. What their destiny might have been will not be known, because another terrific convulsion of the earth, carving out the lands as they are known to moderns, hurled all into chaos again. Great strips of the western coast sank. Vanaheim and western Asgard, uninhabited and glacial-haunted wastes for 100 years, vanished beneath the waves. The ocean flowed around the mountains of western Cimmeria to form the North Sea. These mountains became the islands later known as England, Scotland, and Ireland, and the waves rolled over what had been the Pictish wilderness and the Bosonian marches. In the north, the Baltic Sea was formed, cutting Asgard into the peninsulas, later known as Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and far to the south the Stygian continent was broken away from the rest of the world, on the line of cleavage formed by the river Nilus in its westward trend. Over Argos, the western Koth, and the western lands of Shem washed the blue ocean men, later called the Mediterranean. But where land sank elsewhere, a vast expanse west of Stygia rose out of the waves, forming the whole western half of the continent of Africa. The buckling of the land thrust up great mountain ranges in the western part of the northern continent. Whole Nordic tribes were blotted out, and the rest retreated eastward. The territory about the slowly drying inland sea was not affected, and there, on the western shores, the Nordic tribes began a pastoral existence, living in more or less peace with the Cimmerians, and gradually mixing with them. In the west, the remnants of the Picts, reduced by the cataclysm once more to the status of Stone Age savages, began the incredible virility of their race once more to possess the land, until, at a later age, they were overthrown by the westward drifts of the Cimmerians and Nordics. This was so long after the breaking up of the continent that only meaningless legends told of former empires. This drift comes within the reach of modern history, and need not be repeated. It resulted from a growing population which thronged the steppes west of the inland sea, which still later, much reduced in size, was known as the Caspian. to such an extent that migration became an economic necessity. The tribes moved southward, northward, and westward into those lands now known as India, Asia Minor, and Central and Western Europe. They came into these countries as Aryans, but there were variations among these primitive Aryans, some of which are still recognized today, others which have long been forgotten. The blonde Achaeans, Gauls, and Britons, for instance, were descendants of pure-blooded Aesir. The Nemedians of Irish legendary were the Nemedian Aesir. The Danes were descendants of pure-blooded Vanir, and the Goths, the ancestors of the other Scandinavian and Germanic tribes, including the Anglo-Saxons, were descendants of a mixed race whose elements contained Vanir, Aesir, and Cimmerian strains. The Gaels, ancestors of the Irish and Highland Scotch, descended from pure-blooded Cimmerian clans. The Cymric tribes of Britain were a mixed Nordic Cimmerian race, which preceded the purely Nordic Britons into the Isles, and thus gave rise to a legend of Gaelic priority. The Cimbri, who fought Rome, were of the same blood, as well as the Gemeri of the Assyrian and Grecians, and Gomer of the Hebrews. Other clans of the Cimmerians adventured east into the drying inland sea, and a few centuries later mixed with the Hyrcanian blood, returned westward as Scythians. The original ancestors of the Gaels gave their name to modern Crimea. The ancient Cimmerians had no connection with the Western race. They were a mixed people of Hyrcanian and Shemitic bloods, who were not taken into the conquerors in their retreat. Many tribes of Shem escaped that captivity, and from pure-blooded Shemites, or Shemites mixed with Hyborian or Nordic blood, were descended the Arabs, Israelites, and other straighter-featured Semites. The Canaanites, or Alpine Semites, traced their descent from Shemitic ancestors mixed with the Cushites, settled among them by their Hyrcanian masters. The Elamites were a typical race of this type. The short, thick-limbed Etruscans, base of the Roman race, were descendants of the people of mixed Stygia, Hyrcanian and Pictus strains, and originally lived in the ancient kingdom of Koth. The Hyrcanians retreated into the eastern shores of the continent, evolved into the tribes later known as Tatars, Huns, Mongols, and Turks. The origins of other races of the modern world may be similarly traced in almost every case, older far than they realized. Their history stretches back into the mists of the forgotten Hyborian age. Alright, I gotta go get some stuff in a cave. I just grabbed some food. But that is the the lore that sets up the Conan background. Give me some food. Just need a couple of pieces, I think. There we go. Let's take that. And that. Alright, let's go. Oh, you follow me. Okay. That guy, remember saying, making comments. It all makes sense now. Pure blood, yo. Damn, that was good. Did not know. Yeah. It is good. It's a good lore. It's fascinating. That was one of the best lore episodes ever. Well, it's courtesy of Howard. I have any wood on me. Got hyenas chasing me. Not that hyenas are a problem. I actually think that was true history. Yeah, I know, right? That's what it feels like. Especially how it ties in, how he ties it into, current day nations and peoples and races and stuff. And you're like, Conan? Are you real? You gotta take it easy, easy. The long AFK. No, walk, the long walk. It's more like a sprint. This guy, that's jump. It's gotta be the path. Alright, here we go. Wait, where's the axe? La 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 la. Heavy attack, heavy attack, heavy attack. Oh. Ouch. Right, where is the figgy ladder? Here we go. There, look. Where's my dude? Come here, my dude. Should carry some shit for me. Let's do this. Here we go. Just gotta eat. Yeah, yeah. That was the problem. It wasn't that she couldn't find the way out, but she didn't have the stamina to make the climb because we've got different stats. I got a lot of grit, like a lot of grit. The only way to get out of there was if she'd been able to do a stat change, like on the move. It's such a weird cave. They did this like on purpose, just to. Bad developers, no biscuit. Let's get out of here. Wait. It's down here. That's right. I understand now. I understand the layout of this cave. Go wait for my stamina. There we go. You gotta make it easy. And after this, it'll be time to call it a night. Run. So Gaza is streaming now. Okay. You wanna go hang out with Gaza? Oh, you mean just in general she's streaming? I saw that she streamed Roblox. I didn't see the stream. In general, yeah. Yeah, streaming. Yep. Join the insanity. The last episode is nothing but Daddy's voice. Was he in Discord or something? Oh, she left her desktop audio on. I'm trying to figure out the logistics of that. So she was streaming. She had desktop audio on. Oh, and she was watching Curator at the same time as he streamed. So she was streaming while he was streaming. And watching the Curator stream. Yeah. It's like you play the game and just outsource out the verbal content. Said the hill is going to grow. What hill? Oh, another cross. Oh, okay. Right, Gaza's going up there now, is she? Whoops. Whoopsie. In a few weeks. Gotta have long-term plans. Hyena just disappeared. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Ran out of stamina. Alright, we're back. I know where I put this stuff. Alright, 1 second, I'll be back. So I'll wrap this up. I'm back. Oh, alright, out for night. Just a number. Alright, man. See you later. Do 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 do. Going for a run again. Oh. Bum 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 bum. Dun 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 dun. bump, 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 bump. Time to get some pork. Don't ask me to dive into this, man. All songs you see on all the span and pressed on the see some curry. Come on, let's run and turn the corner. Yeah, big. Should see them anytime now. Yeah, they are. Now suddenly I wish I had brought the cleaver. What? Just use the axe. Savory flesh. That's not what I want. I want fresh cut pork loins. The freshest, cutteriest, porkiest loins. I hear you, Biggie. Yo yo. Should've gone for the axe. Oh, it's not a pig. It's a plant. Should be another one around here somewhere. There he is. Give me what I want.
Do you check this little place for NPCs?
Let me see where you are. Oh, the big place? New Asgarth?
Yeah.
Yeah, in there's an armor I want, but I haven't. I pushed in, and then I got waylaid by like a ton of guys, so I didn't go in. But there are little huts around the like on the outskirts of the wall, and they have tier 3 NPCs in them at times. I pulled this a tier 3 cook, and I pulled back a tier 3 priest. So yeah, but I haven't looked too close. There's so many NPCs in there though. I'm just looking for pork meat at the moment. What's the best tool do you think I should use to get this pork meat?
Axe.
Okay. Yeah, I'm like, oh man, I wish I got the cleaver. The cleaver's so good at getting meat. It's just like...
I'm not staying in the usual place.
Yeah, I just took out 3 of them. Or 4 of them. I'm looking for more now.
I think you'll be lucky if you get more than that. Did you not get any?
No, you got savory meat.
What were you using?
I used axe. I used the knife at first, and then I used the axe.
The pickaxe or the axe?
Well, a pickaxe, I guess, but it...
Yeah, well, a pickaxe is as good as using a pick. Doesn't work, you gotta use an axe.
Okay.
I've never seen more than 3 or 4 spawn at a time. So I think you just wipe them out.
Well, I mean, yeah, I was moving to the next location, which is in the woods. I don't know the location so well, but I know we went there once. Oh yeah, yeah. Found some more. Just another one down here. Another 2. Shall I leave him here? Or you want to come get him, or?
No, I have an axe.
Well, I just have the pickaxe. Oh, you don't have an axe. Oh wait, I've got a stone axe. I got a stone hatchet I could use. Aha, this way. I was just waiting for you. They're just down the bottom here. There's one over there. One past the deer. Let's check over here. Here he is. There's another one on me when you're done with that one. Stack up those bleeds.
Yeah, I'm just getting sorry. Oh, there's one.
Nice.
Alright, where did you go?
I am back where the first one was. On that little mound. The trees on it. So I'm directly north of you. I'll just run towards you. Here I am. Need like signal flares. It's right. Yeah, it's disappeared for me, so I can't see.
Yeah, I just cleared it up. What the hell? Well,
Do you want me to take
I
those?
got one thing.
I can take it.
I got 5. So.
Do you want to look for some more? Jeez, is that enough?
Well, 5 is usually enough.
Okay.
And
Oh.
I only got 1 cooker.
Yeah.
I mean, if it is more, putting it in the fridge would be helpful.
Ah, yeah, good idea. I mean, I could make a more concerted effort for this meat if we want it. Just get out here some time, run around a lot.
Mostly for the wolves.
Yeah.
I took down the dire wolf up at Freya's, so I'm gonna run that past it when we go back.
Oh, yeah. Those other ones might spawn on the way back too. Oh, here's one. There's a little boar. You want a pet boar?
This is a very big boar. He's bigger than me.
I got a boar shoot.
Last time.
Okay, hold on. Coming! Coming!
His charge is gonna be me.
It's huge.
Sweet, they got a lot of him.
I'm about as big as his head. Hack, 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 hack. Scared me?
I got 5.
Oh, that's good.
I get 5 off the little ones too.
There's another one. There's a little one.
You can pick up the little one if you want. I don't know what they eat.
It doesn't matter. I picked one up, but I don't care to actually. Do we really want one of those hanging around? I've got enough animals as it is already. I've got another one. Hmm?
Weirdly, I can't see you anymore.
I am.
I should be looking right at you, but
No. I'm coming to you here. Yep. Turn right. It's just over here. There we go. Looks like this log on the ground. Cool.
yep. All right. Let's head back.
Well, if you want, oh no, you're gonna go for the wolf. That's right. Find a bear. Oh no, stag. Yeah, still got all your mats and stuff that you'd collected as well.
I'm mostly scared about the demon blood.
Yeah.
See all the stuff's weighing you down, just dump it.
Nah, I've got the dude for the heavy stuff, like the bat skins. Which is good, because we need that for tar. And you good for food, right? Because could split mine.
Oh yeah, that's
There's
like
a white
the-
wolf here. Okay,
Yeah, it might not
I
be
got
a
a frost.
baby spawn.
I got a frostwolf cub, but I'm encumbered. There's 2 frostwolves. Oh, one of them's grey. You don't want
Fair
the grey
enough.
ones, right?
No, the white ones are the ones that can hunt. The grey ones can too, but yeah.
Don't shoot the cub, you son of a bitch. There it is. Alright, I'm just grabbing them all, and you can you can decide if they live or die when we get back.
You know I'm not going to do that.
Okay. So I should get rid of the ones that we don't want now. I mean, I shouldn't have put it like that. Now that in hindsight, I didn't mean it like that. But I know how it was taken.
Yeah, but look, in this game, I have the option of putting them in the pet incubator thing, or putting them in a bag on the ground to die. Like, can't you just set them free again? I mean, come on. Couldn't they just run away and disappear, as opposed to being in a bag? Seems really inhumane.
I'm like, I could check that settlement for NPCs, and I'm like, man, I just can't be bothered. There's a bear running wild. Some player must be coming through here. There's someone on the road if it's not you.
I'm on the road right now.
Do 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 do.
You know, if you took Carmel out with you, then your character would pass with Julie.
Oh yeah.
Basically changed her in your story.
From the Year of the Bears. No, she's still blonde, and she's just the same. she's just the same pretty much. Now that you say that, though, I'm like, I can't remember describing her. Though I know I would have, but yeah, in the start somewhere when she arrives on the scene. Oh, that's good stuff there.
Apparently you can change your in-game name.
Really? Oh.
Well, I get that impression because if you look at player lists, some people's PSN names does not line up with their Conan name.
Wonder what's going on with that. Run out of stamina. Yeah, I have almost 45 grit, so I have tons of extra stamina.
Yeah, I could get right to the top of the ledge, but I was like maybe 1 or 2 steps from getting high enough to actually stay
Yep.
up.
Crest the hill.
Yeah. So, tiny bit. Really nice. I can't see these NPCs, but it's concerning.
I'm just clearing up the blacksmith. I'll get the other guy. He's chasing you.
That's good, because I just got away from me.
Fire this one. Ease you up. Freya moved in. She needs to. No stamina. Give me the stamina. Sorry, Freya. Bleeds on this wall. Oh, nice. I got him.
Alright, let's hit
Ooh. Ah, nice sword.
Oh, almost rolled off the cliff. I got the guy, the fight guy up there, I got his stuff.
Sweet. Are you going to wait for another cub, or?
No.
Okay. Yeah, because we've got one, so we can always put that into it.
Would have been nice if there had been one.
For a double whammy.
Well, I've already got one on the animal.
Triple whammy. Get 25 durability left on the axe. Put the knife away. Don't run with knives. Dom. It's funny, on the back of Half a War, I read the the blurbs from other artists, other writers and stuff, or reviewers. I don't know. Usually it's writers on Joe Abercrombie's books. It was like something like Thorn Bethune makes Katniss Evergreen look like Dorothy. I think Dorothy from Wizard of Oz. I don't know what her last name is.
Gale.
Yeah, Dorothy Gale. How did you know that?
How did you not?
I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a dude. Maybe that's the distinction. Yeah, that was funny. Is it raining? No. It's windy.
The waterfall.
Oh yeah. It's just like hazy and this watery noise. Oh, is this tiger still fighting? What the hell's going on down here? This tiger and this hyena have been fighting together. The last 3 trips I've made. Now you're both dead. Sick of you. That's what you get. Too much stuff to get fish. What am I thinking here? Blood, demon blood. Good, you come here. Stand guard. Oh, so the all the animals are on this bearer.
Cool. We got a boar. Now you're gonna have to look at the wiki to see what I need for a greater boar.
Okay. Okay, so
I can tell you it's not pork. He's not even starting to cook.
okay, let's see. Greater. 20, 20, 30. It's the spice thing. Puffball mushroom. 20% chance.
Is that it?
Otherwise, it's
I
like.
think we have some mushrooms.
Yeah, I think we do have some puffballs somewhere. How am I gonna do this? Take you. Place it with you. Start stripping out the pelts.
So nothing higher than 20, huh?
Yeah, that's it. Oh, there's 30, but it's shade spice. Shade spice puffer mushroom. Interesting. Hardened steel sword.
PlayStation says I played too much today.
Yeah, because it's starting to grind to a halt. Or is it going... Is it...
No, I just have low battery.
Yes.
Okay, your shelves in the bedroom. freaking annoying. I can't run past the bottom of the bed.
Alright, let's remove the shelves. There we go.
I mean, you can put them, like, on the sides here.
Yeah. I know, there's plenty of places I can put the shelves. Oh, good.
Are we just putting wolf pelts on the tennis bench?
No, you put them on the armor first and strip them down. You get more leather out of it, and then you can put them on the tanner's bench to, you know, because you get one tar for every 2 or something like that.
Do you need this plant fiber on the armorer's bench?
No, you can take it off. I know, there's just not enough space.
Yeah, there's no space, I can't do it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask the chest aside.
Yeah. Put in the tar. Resin. Chemical base.
What are we doing with the arrows? They can't be dismantled anymore, huh?
Yeah, just dump them. I don't even bother bringing them back now. We don't use arrows.
Did you get confused between the tannery and the furnace, or was that on purpose?
What did I do? Furnace.
You put like 600 helps in the furnace.
I did? Oops.
Yeah.
I did. I must have thought I clicked on the tannery. Yeah. That's funny. Resin.
Okay, so it's 148. 52 more stone. Corrupted stone.
52 more stone.
Corrupt. Yeah,
Ah, corrupt, okay.
stone. And then a place to put it, you know.
The corrupt stone.
No, the map room.
Oh, yes, yes.
See, I probably could have put it where you put that vault, but...
Hey, you can move the vault.
Well, where's the vault gonna go?
Oh, just move it down the other end or something. I don't know where the vault...
The vault's up, that's fine.
Yeah, vault's great. So much space.
We could just stick in the middle of this big thing down here, where the thralls are.
Yeah.
Enough room down here. Something like a 8x8 squares. Fucking huge.
Yeah, it is huge. Ah. Stupid boar's heads in one place.
There is actually not enough room here to put it down.
What, that place between the altars?
Yeah.
I might
There's
just
not
have to
enough room.
construct a floor, like say, even where the elephants are or something.
Well, I mean, I can do another tower.
We could go up, but you could always have it on the base, and then if you want a tower, you could build a tower above it.
You can't build over top of a map room.
Well, yeah. It's apparently with only some difficulty.
Yeah, but even if we built a roof over it, it wouldn't have the stability we need.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine. Another pillar is less disruptive, and it's just getting the placement right. I'll probably have to do a whole lot of pillars going upward and build out from the other towers to make sure I get the base of it correct.
Alright. You are the professional when it comes to building. I am just in the dark still about the finer details. Alright, almost done emptying this inventory. I need a tier 3 PA who just can sort all this shit out.
Do they have those?
Be so good if they did.
Yeah, but then they'd have to actually, like, make boxes for specific things, like plant box and
Yeah,
construction box, etc., etc.
just designate it all. Alright. Why did I come down here? Oh, that's right. 5-second trip. I couldn't remember what I was doing. Cool. Always the branches, man. I'm like, every time I'm overburdened, I'm like, why? I've got rid of everything. And it's branches. It's branches. Yo, follow.
Alright, I'm done.
Sweet. I'll be off in a sec too. Oh, yeah. Oh. Alright, everybody. Thanks for watching. Bring down the stream. Good night. Hit the follow button.